Yes? We talked a little bit about that when we compared Agamemnon, didn't we? Or not? Because Agamemnon, remember, kills his daughter, sacrifices his daughter in order for the fleet to continue on. Abraham is famously, he's left Ur of the Chaldees, and he's, the Sumer, so it's Sumer, so that's back very, very far back. And he has his camp out in the desert, and the Elohim, which is actually plural for El, right? So El is the one word for God in Hebrew. Allah is the Arab word for it, Allah, right? It's interesting if you're familiar with the Babylonian god, it was Baal, right? However you would say that. And Beth El, by the way, means something God. I should have looked that up. I used to know what Beth, I think it means something like altar of God or something like that. In any case, the Elohim really enjoyed their meal, and they promised Abraham all of the land around for his heirs. And famously, his wife Sarai laughs at God because she was postmenopausal and knew that there's no way this old fart is going to have any children. But he was serious. He decided he wanted to make sure he had children because the gods promised that he would have heirs that would inherit all this land. And so Sarai famously gave him Hagar, her slave girl, right, in order to have children. And that succeeds, and they end up with Ishmael, which means God hears him. Yes? Something like that. And the problem now was that Sarai was no longer the chief wife because Hagar has the son who's the heir of Abraham. So she insists that Abraham take Hagar and send her away. And he does. So he takes her out to the desert with Ishmael and leaves her there alone with enough supplies for a week or so, I guess. I don't know what you do in that kind of a case. And then he returns, and Hagar is beyond herself, wondering what to do. So she runs in circles around the spot, from hill to hill, around the spot where Ishmael is lying there. And there's like 3 or 4 different variations on this at that point. But the one is that the angel Gabriel comes to that spot and creates a well. And the water attracts the birds, and the birds indicate to other nomads that, hey, there's water over there, and it didn't used to be, so they all go over to see what it is, find Hagar and Ishmael, and adopt them into their tribe. And so those people are the Arabs. Meanwhile, Sarai, miracle of miracles, ends up becoming pregnant, which is amazing, and she has Isaac. Yes? And Isaac is now the official heir of Abraham as far as the Jewish people are concerned. Now here's the interesting story that throws this all into a tizzy. Abraham is told by God to take his only son up the mountain and sacrifice him to prove himself to God. So Abraham takes his son, his only son, takes him up the mountain, brings a bundle of wood, a rope, a knife, and the son says, Dad, we've got the wood, we've got the knife, and we've got the rope, but we forgot the animal. Of course, Abraham ties his son up, puts him on the altar, and is about ready to slay him when the hand of Gabriel stops him, and he has to look, and he sees that there's a goat entangled in the briars there, and so he realizes his son has been saved, and they sacrifice the goat and come back down the mountain. Question is, which son was that? Well, if you're an Arab, it obviously was Ishmael, because Ishmael was the only son at that point, right? If you're Jewish, on the other hand, it was obviously Isaac, because Isaac is the ancestor of the Jewish tribes, and that means, well, if it was Isaac, then the land belongs to the Jews, but if it was Ishmael, the land belongs to the Arabs. And guess what? They still fight over whose land it is today, because if you believe the one story, it's yours, and if you believe the other story, it's yours. So if you ever wonder why, that's an interesting part of that. I love bringing that up because I found it absolutely amazing when I first started reading that there's different traditions. It's not a clear-cut case. So Jesus is Jewish, born in Nazareth, most likely, and at some point they argue over the date. By the way, most think it was a couple years before AD's, Anno Domini 1, but they think it was a couple of years before that, because of other dates involved. King Herod was still alive, King Herod the Great, who was the one who built the temple at the time. But there are other things too. Sepphoris is 4 miles from Nazareth, and Sepphoris is a Roman town, actually more Greek at the time than Roman. The languages of the area were Greek for business, and I always have trouble remembering the other one. It's not Armenian, it sounds like Aramaic. Aramaic was the common language of the people in that area. And then if you were a rabbi, you also learned Hebrew, because you had to read the scrolls at the temple, or at least in the synagogue. Right? Synagoge means church, actually, so that's kind of interesting too. It's like ecclesia in Latin. So those are all just different names for when you come together in a religious community. So Jesus probably spoke 3 languages. Aramaic, which would have been the common language he would have spoke to others, but he would have had at least a business understanding of Greek, and he probably worked in Sepphoris as if he was a carpenter. Would have been where he would have worked. So Josephus is another source. So when we read other books by Josephus, he does talk about Jesus in a couple of places. Jesus was a miracle worker, but there were actually lots of miracle workers. So the shock was not so much that Jesus did miracles, because there were actually lots of miracle workers. It's called healthcare back then. But the thing was that he was a peasant, and that seemed unusual to people, that a Jewish peasant would have actually been capable of doing those miracles. And of course, he also got into trouble. Revolution in Judea is a terrific book about the events. There are lots, and there are also, of course, fights over that. This is from 1980, so it's dating my reading. Sorry, I'm sure there's more contemporary works on it. But the idea, of course, is that by looking at the different religions, variations of Judaism at the time, there were 3 sects The one is associated with the priesthood, the temple, and the other one is associated with the rabbis, and those are also referred to as Pharisees. And then the other one are the Essenes. You heard of the Essenes? And all the Essenes are the ones who were the wild sect that were down in Qumran, and that's where you get the Dead Sea Scrolls. So they were a sect of Israel. That might be part of that Dead Sea Scroll. The one link I recommended you look at is Jesus to Christ. It's a frontline presentation from years ago, but it's still good. It's still very interesting, and it's a combination of videos. You can watch roughly 4 hours worth. It came on like PBS back then, like an hour a week. You know how they would do. But in any case, the Essenes are part of that, and they're the ones, the sect that had their community in the caves down where the Dead Sea Scrolls would be hidden at the time that the Romans destroyed Jerusalem. Those that could would take the valuable things, mostly the scrolls, to the Dead Sea caves, which are fascinating, and hid the scrolls in there. The Romans followed them, though, and found them and went in and destroyed most of them. But they left the pieces, and so a contemporary event is the individuals that went in and used DNA to check the lambskin that they were made of, find the pieces that go together, and reconstruct them, and as a result they have a lot of the Dead Sea Scrolls all complete. There was also a golden scroll that they found that was still intact, and so on. So that's pretty interesting. But the Essenes were kind of the wild bunch that thought that the priests in the temple were doing it all wrong, and they were going to do it right. And by the way, it was much more like a monastery. You had to give up everything in order to become part of the Essenes. You had to make the vow of poverty and so on. So it was kind of just like the Augustinians would be and the Jesuits would be and so on. So kind of interesting. Apparently, Jesus tried out all three of the sects and decided actually to follow John the Baptist. And John the Baptist, oddly enough, seems to be a cynic philosopher. So if we look at not Richard, Robert, sorry. According to this scholar, Robert Funk, who was a member, by the way, one of the leaders of the Jesus Seminar, which is what the frontline Jesus to Christ was based on, their work. Jesus was a follower of John the Baptist until John the Baptist was killed. Everybody is familiar with John the Baptist being killed? Yes? No? John the Baptist, ich will den Kopf des Johannes, says Salome. Actually, that's German, so she wouldn't have said that. You could pick lots of these, by the way. John the Baptist is in the hole. Salome has been asked by her stepfather, Herod the Great. No, now Herod Antipas. Is that still Herod the Great? I guess, no, it can't be. Because Herod the Great died shortly after Jesus was born. But in any case, he's an evil guy, and he's sexually attracted to his stepdaughter. And so Herodias, who's her mother, doesn't want her to do it. But since Herod insists, she decides to do the dance of the 7 veils for Herod. So it's about